Okay, perfect. The world is fundamentally phenomenological against this and precedes as one regress any essence where that essence just why ways to which is infinitely regress only humans creating the honest and explain plus the actions all to exist as must have much your definition means the essence of the thing only occurs as far as there's a being itself to first acquire we firstly demands found in existence of small beings who not experience the world top down medicine apprehension of essence rather be interested within the world just unique ways to be only be a being the subject to come to know a being in essence for linguistic exchange in fundamental preconditioned by communication of experience that the meaning is truly social rather than central beings and dimension of beings who explain phenomenal existence in the context of their being five relationality subject to find relation to other subject of the world around them I was teach my students about my flow is the sun my mother etc species of universalize my character of actual relational force of the whole that I create to use six temporality beings or fundamentals of forms exist with particular place and time subjects or subjectivity making totalizing against impossible as each subject changes over time within their time that existence Dasein being in the world is just a reorientation towards identity ethics speech and death dog or to be no day Dasein being exists in the world among other things human is to be fixed and meta versa lost me to people telling us the meaning of being in the world is saying Korea existential identity and where completely what beings are given like uniqueness and this gives rise to the possibility standards of society or various individuals will themselves one being realized their own destiny their consider will be a massive but it will eventuality being the world is a being with other however may come to exist only reference to others overrides outside his own accountability by making judgment for the jury's alien itself who is vaguely determined moral autonomy and responsibility being in the world says itself in discourse talk is also a relation of being all that talk is doing is tracking or is long costing illusions in an echo chamber of moves interruption of cognition as to what it being communicates speech and wonder who's mere not validity the temporality of outside is solidified by the certainty at all being is being toward that's outside stands for itself and utmost potentiality for being outside stands for the utmost potentiality neoliberalism is metaphysical ontology being that frames of being interested in reserve utility devoid of authentic being that just by the philosophy is not be a process conditioning through material processes running in 13 and framing is able to measure economy millennials and force conservation globalization and science to be understood as a broad political order based on metaphysical positioning and neoliberalism denotes every action to the economy of record rationality of Gaussian's benefits human existence is only to serve the profit of human is valued as whole and only meaning appears as human domination of the global human beings turn into technical subject and frame tranquilize ideas and reserves the human capital way separates human reserves their capability to target as well as the ones people will recognize ontological neoliberalism creating it is that encourage reinforcing necessity of particle conditions that new form powers based on the ontological framing of human and non-human life through the actualization of different materialities relationalities power relations space formation civil society is in service of a world like displacing forward from a constant space to a place to a constant mirror space with existentiality mediosity 10 placing up as a structure of feeling realizes disruption on sensibility area by experience unease and trivial business place uprooted and out of places things here in the neighborhoods is shaped by the culture of acts values norms place of the life world spaces is abstract encompassing a multitude of settings the body is not experienced supposed to be ideality no meaning disembodied not experience of active simple relationship distinguishes places space of western topic itself as a result of decross-duration because of an abstract and generalization relationships are essential steps moral about an emotional well-being the body itself is perceived through labor consumption eating organism feeling your body through them I mean as well as the embody the relational self or mind speech understanding autonomous self and education must work on revolution of students standards servant educators committed authority our reorientation fosters excellent students collaborative educators Thompson 16 ontological education no resource substance or ideal education also not only excellence but also organized we're working on the same project excellence is cultivating human essence acknowledging curation and embracing ontological world university community understood as self is committed to involvement science self-reason with an ontological causing encourage revolution and transformation of sciences and humanities university would be responsible for forming fully cultivating individuals the standard is consistent with being towards outside and versus a saturated being throughout the life ontologically disrupting its authenticity and creating humanity as a standard reserve resources for reward and saying itself it definitely must reorient our understanding wars and intricately designed peace and maintenance of peace has become the justification for necessity of war America so steeped in the culture of war only our ontological investigation open up avenue for return to Dasein Omich 105 technically the opportunity subject object with a human being become another peace standing reserve is realizing absolute war version is the truth with everything is standing reserve exhaustion for the level possible we know our level like extremely other subjects to no other obligation of the seven war is a conception of being peace defines itself with regard to war everyone is literally soldier worker target warfare signal change the nature of being America the question of being is veiled the collusion between industry and military the democracy must spread allow the industry to see its expectation military prosperity and equals including penetrating mainstream without awareness the question being cannot be posed in war presence with an obsession with Americanism that obscures being as American war no longer exists as such but rather become justification to avoid confrontation with the reality of being we should withdraw from the water region and confront or withdraw from being Mitch 105 technological compartment no longer stays in accordance with being is how calls upon them to account for being the more available the being becomes the more being withdraws where the items of standing reserve are available in essence that landscape becomes a star also this applies to standing reserve realities may be more shaped to accommodate distribution of the distribution and relaying of stock world war requires quotation terrorism is the truth America is the place where being is the most withdrawal as Americanism spread America is lost culture enemy attacks America from within terror is the feel being of bond with being one that face of persists and withdraw being and participates in the same withdrawal memory of being terrified one accords with being and this means for the American reality of that country may be seen as a question of being finally post-president hate all just have nothing wondrous about them they're simply there at our disposal to be distributed wonder of being can no longer be encountered abandonment of being without the fully machinational world of technology there's a being from sensory technology terrifies essential we flee from it we respond to hardening of our own ways the American response to terror is one Americanism and institutional mandate solutions of paper with the root cause of militarist materialism broad and pointed social movements in the direction of the affirmative are necessary and academic spaces development in 22 Neutrality hardly is used in military materialism. Ideas do not compete with military with material realities without upgrading alternative realities around. Developed a project with anti-militarism. Wilson linked to price of abolish nuclear weapons, yet not systematically opposed that the U.S. military industrial concept opposite to nuclear war does not prevent interventions that trigger nuclear expansionism. There's no academic prize based on the core idea of anti-militarism. There are no development of anti-military studies anywhere in the English-speaking world that really say not specify the strategic intervention of anti-imperialism. Universities pivotal in the movement and intervention in Vietnam and present institutional configurations and these movements are hostile. I'll send all these cards after. Okay. International relations of foreign planetary management, in which we get attempts to conform categories to individual universal Western norm, beginning at 1. The age of collective attempts to system the order and control of the human nature of politics, the violent imposition of program on being politics control, consolidation of control cannot be overcome by attempting control and secure the human drive to control and any conformity by universal norm and in framing eventual root cause of repression, Robinson in 20 some ontological difference between being what lies below, naturalized through racialized assemblages and marks people disposable, enslavable, such as genocide, the colonized constitutes a zone of known being, leave indigents, black people inherently unkillable without being murdered, and calculative thought is a link preferred ethics of revealing Kennedy in 14. We must believe the action, cause effects, and consequential disaster, superficiality, assign values, and effects of the standard useless effects, let's see the essential nature of action bringing forth. I'll send the cards.
Can I wait for a cross for that?
Yeah, for sure. Alright, there's N.
There's in there.
Yeah, it's the same doc, just at 201.
Okay. Okay. You good?
Yep.
Alright, what is DOSON?
Sure. It is a reorientation towards the world in which we would reject notions of humanism, technology, science, rationality in favor of something that stops treating things as a standing reserve, stops enfrainment, etc.
So what does that look like? Like, what stops enfrainment?
Yeah, we would no longer view things as standing reserves, which means that we stop enframing this sort of ideals or individuals, etc.
Okay, does the 1AC defend like an analytical politics that is attached to that? That is
No, the 1AC is not attached to politics.
Okay, does the 1AC defend the resolution?
Yeah. A form of the resolution.
A form of resolution. What form?
Sure. So we think that we should reorient the way that we operate military by reducing military presence, because we should reorient the idea of military to stop standing reserves, or viewing things as standing reserves, rather.
Okay, what does it mean to view something as a standing reserve?
Sure. That's the argument about enfrainment that I was just talking about. Viewing something as a standing reserve means managing it, controlling it, and trying to basically impose your will on it in every single instance, rather than just accepting the fact that it will be with you in the world.
Okay, so you can't, wait, so what does it mean to control something?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's inherent to the word control, right? It would mean that you are managing it, that you are, using how it operates, etc.
Okay, so control sort of means you are engaged with something or have a relationship with something with it.
Well,
how does that relate
mean
to like things like
with
property
something
rights, for
specific?
example? I have a computer. Do I control the computer? How should I interact with my computer?
I mean, the F is a question of what happens in terms of military presence, so I don't really understand.
I think it's a relevant question in the context of how your framework answers other sort of relevant questions.
Okay, I mean, our argument would be that if you're viewing your computer as a standing reserve, that's bad. If you're not viewing it as a standing reserve, then there's no problem with it.
Okay. The next question, the 1AC seems to have an effect of neoliberalism. What does it do? Actually, that's fine. What is mirror space?
Mirror space?
Yeah.
No, the word mirror comes before space, which would mean that it's saying just space. Mirror is just another word for just.
Can you explain like what that looks like materially?
What do you mean what it looks like?
Can you give me an example of that?
Of mere space?
Yeah.
We're in a space right now.
Okay, sure. Why is that bad?
That's not the affirmative argument.
Why is it good?
That's also not the affirmative argument.
What
the
about
argument
it?
is literally just that civil society in the status quo has been displaced from a concept of place to a concept of space without existentiality. This argument is literally just saying that the way the world works right now denies our ability to be existential agents within spaces, which means that it's moved to a concept of space.
So what about the world has made it that way?
Well, yeah, sure. The card gives a ton of examples, and the cards above do. They say that the way we experience uneasiness when we project our existential anxiety onto individuals.
Like uneasiness, just like emotions. I feel like that.
Yeah, I mean, the card obviously gives emotional warrants.
So what about the current global ordering makes that unique based off of like say like existence?
Well,
of
because
thousands
we'd
of years
say that things like enfrainment are what are the root cause of the way we view this, like.
Obviously, enfrainment is bad. What about the current global ordering causes enfrainment in a unique way that is different?
The
from
fact
the
that we have existential anxiety that we try to project on other individuals, which is the reason why
We've
we
never
treat
had that
things as
before?
standing reserves.
Okay. We're doing 4 or 5.
Whatever you want.
I will do 5.
Oh, are you starting?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Alright, got 40 seconds again. Orders 2 off case.
You said 2 off case.
Yeah, case is top down. It's in there.
Wait, is case just straight top down?
Yeah.
Okay.
Floor everywhere.
Wait, so should I get a separate sheet for case, or is it like actually just all the ad cards?
It's like actually on the end card.
Okay, yeah.
Everyone's good?
Okay. 40 seconds.
There. Good. You good? Okay. Through the racial, ontological orders of the set of master native and slave, the Western man the environmental destruction, nuclear violence, and the political theft, invading settler colonialism, slavery, and investment that made necessary for the every functioning of all things normalized. Bars 21, the Eurocene, links climate change, slavery, the nation, and peoples, and the traffic happens all for the same global order. What about human teachings, modeling, human racial equity, initiation, and the receipt, the racial human market, the Indian, and the dead, and the death, this was created torture geography, where life is systematically destroyed, where transferring genocide from a behavioral life to a geographic one. The civil studies and the creation of settler colonies, and the development of the West, but the world's existence of genocide, the desire for the West, or model of living ensures that the Eurocene is not only driven by the public economy, but also by the living economy, is well pursued as balance and creates a political ontology with Black Native American or Native American people struggle with our non-human political ontology as for metaphysical, ecological, area alongside the immediate resident of murders of Black and Native people that use ontological structures continued into the presence of legible solution, moral pessimism, which in the world is already burning because the words flesh come from the enslaving, killing Black and Native people, ignored favor, liberal ideas, incremental form. There's not such time for sustaining liberal processes, make us more comfortable with it now. Do anything about our natural depths if there is any hope left that is in the clear direction of this world. And decolonization is not a metaphor. They're retreating the politics of materialization as we and is their abstraction of material reality. That's Tarkosh and Kukun 20. The no reflection moves into material work to decolonization. The chunking challenges ask for how we can conceptualize the mechanisms of change, decolonization, done a metaphor, colonialism with materialist and political relationships that we struggle to work. Settler colonialism is going to be doing that analysis, but in age with it, regardless of people come together, the intellectual moves work. This in theory within relative realities is all the physical and the most theoretical recategorization connection and enlightenment belief that we individual rationality can realize this from the material bondage. The new story of the political relationships is naturalized and taken as a basis for action. The alternatives refusal is generative action towards the decolonial futures must make cross make the genocide of rights. King 17, the generative refusal of decolonial abolition tradition taking Western thought upon itself as colonial knowledge, making the colonial meta-narrative allowed research, make question of assumptions, expose the violent peculiarities, meta-narrative refusal that refers to the narration act by European theory, which genocide unilaterally a native epistemology, that when the U.S. the practice of genocide is healthy to exist, and native peoples can exist in the U.S. can no longer from the condition of being human cities include Black native just into the practice word through the terms of identity, and our opportunity of debating the judgment of the applicability of the aspiration point for Wangett's hypothetical implementation as a research product. If the next analytic that reads the definition of settlers and academic cases reproduce colonial subjects and opportunity is only real impact of around 1017 settlers and the charge of daily life predicated on genocide. The settlers position occupied land is sustained through 80 of Austria decolonization must include analysis of the subject and the settler colonialism against the verdict creating fraction of the wholeness or restoring of settler mythology traditions and currently rated to feature their practice of everyday life that give settlers basis their meaning. And the second off reject the Heidegger was a renowned Nazi with reasons high critique of is highly anti-Semitic politics. This proves any subject to the offense. Heidegger critique of psychology and instrumental reason that's why integral from personal anti-Semitism. Wallen 17. Heidegger views the Holocaust characterized by repression and denial. Heidegger characterized the Holocaust as the faith that Jews part of themselves and modern anti-Semitic computer character. Heidegger's critique of technology according to the realism natural and social field had nothing to do with murders and imperious nature that it has perfected from by the various Jewish influence in the Heidegger philosophy is inherently anti-Semitic or racial development and extra through the Ottoman. 14 scholars asking whether the anti-Semitic tendencies rather than previously thought that he previously how to detain the character rather than philosophy. Philosophical diarrhea challenges this view that are hard to defend. Heidegger didn't just pick up his anti-Semitic ideas, he processed them philosophically, filtered it, and his thinking, and therefore their view of living in the world locks in the religious appropriate practices of Brody 14. For Heidegger, anti-Semitism is more than prejudice. World Judaism is and what does it need to get involved in the world, continuing on period of influence, whereas we artists will sacrifice the best blood of people. And we were said it definitely be the moralist impression of Heidegger as used for animals, and they're definitely anti-Semitism is moral imperative. That's Terry, part 14. There are some ideals against a group of people is inherently inspired to another as a result of the substituted fallacies and romanticists, tendencies, and Jews already humanized and controlled in their ghettos and exterminated the case space proper. One top level will read the why philosophy argument, why philosophy intentionally obfuscates and rolled the whiteness plays in how theories, but there's no conditions of blackness cannot be theorized without their racial ethics, but attempt to do so violence, the same philosophy that attempts to appeal to everyone is the raciality and universality, said black people were equivalent to parents at the 20. The white philosophy was mentioned for the race of Asian, into blackness obfuscation regarding its white power privilege. There was a silly philosophers racist person white when it structurally obfuscates its logic concealed its racial assumptions to neutrality and universality, whiteness subtracted because I failed to see it was invisible to me all through in order to the whiteness remained unseen or unmarked, unintented, and unracist. Philosophers were not racist and racist. They saw me as a person who was a philosophical text written. It was not for not enough black book. The assumption that philosophy is exclusively white phenomenon. Reason as why creation the creative thought and white from its essence of communities by the salvation is a white achievement. The white people are innocent to rule the world. It is integral with an narcissistic genocidal impulse to play God. And white philosophy is predicated on a paradoxical resistance and distant from the blackness social death. British response is processed upon black people. The lemon proper top level. The one I see the analytical place is problematic. Absent any inspiration of how colonialism it sort of informs a relationship to politics, which means that the one I see inevitably sort of reinforces a form of combination in the context of who gets an access to a place or who gets an access to a location, which was demonstrated by Crossing saying that we should relinquish our control of different things, demonstrates that Native people are sort of forced to get up and move somewhere else, which is exactly the logic sort of removal that was seen in things like the IRA or the litany of other examples that the King evidence talks about. The sort of next argument control, sort of the sort of existential anxiety. There's no uniqueness as you claim as to how the sort of global ordering is structured differently than it was, say, 100 years ago. But the more evidence present and useful analytic that is the only thing capable of actually determining this. But you should definitely rely on it to resolve the impacts of the 1AC. The sort of gatement of one evidence. There's no cross application. We get sort of new responses to one-year applications of the evidence that weren't explicitly made in the 1AC. It's key to test the affirmative. Two predictions are good in the Kennedy evidence. Anything else enables settlement. If we understand that a prediction is going to happen and an action is going to result in violence towards Native people, anything else obfuscates away from that. It means that you are actively emitting, or your omission to prevent it, to not do that action causes a form of violence. The sort of Robinson evidence demonstrates a link. They say that their form of entrapment is capable of understanding a role of oppression, but how is that actually structured? How can they explain the ways that entrapment occurs differently for black, Native, or white people in the context of the critique? I'll send this card out after the reactionary politics of the 1AC strategic withdrawal that pronounced at the end of the war, massive expansion of the colonial interest, hypocritical moves, enables violent extensions of power under the guise of ambivalent neoliberalism. That's back in Josh 22. There will be a continual leap in the war and the overall floor and terrorism, enabling the taking the wars over as operations continue. The evolved campaign was ever radical, appeared as a continuation of commitment to the LIO, multi-land economic integration as humanitarianism. The administration was biased on the implications of withdrawal, continuing the strikes. This is the war in different location, but provides an indefinite justification for continued violence. We turn the page. Well, starting to the United States will continue to defend our interests, and the violence continues on resistance, even if administration was there to undertake a good faith effort to end the war. It will continue independently. Also, disclosures, voting issue. Spencer did not send the 1AC. He just said that, oh, it's on my wiki, but he has like 6 asks on his wiki, which obviously is not enough to cut before the round, because if I only have 30 minutes, that's like 30 divided by 6, which is 5 minutes per app. Obviously, isn't enough to do an in-depth flash for the 1AC, which they consider is uniquely important. As for the 1AC evidence that talks about educational value in discussions of the affirmative should be a reason as to why you should not vote affirmative as per their performance in the context of that disclosure argument. Independently, the sort of the 1AC, the inability to engage in a politics absent just their refusal to endorse an analytical struggle is inherently problematic. That was a sort of decolonization argument right on the K page. Indicates that the 1AC is unable to engage in a actual resistance to neoliberalism. The response to continued structures in the ontological structures in the real world demonstrates a sort of capacity to sort of fall into a trap of melancholy in which they think that they are affirming the resolution and affirming something valuable because they sort of offer a theorization of the world, but that theorization comes us in the constant model of infinite active relations with the university, but never actually ground actives into the alternative contextualized in the context of the King evidence. I'll give you an example of that. The Native people blockading ships carrying aid to Israel, Tacoma, Washington is an example of the alternative activism outside of the state that is a very useful analytic in the context of activism. I'll send the card.
Okay, good to start cross after the card is sent?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, it's in there. I just replaced the Godfrey card with it.
Okay, good for cross.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just download this real quick.
Yeah.
Okay. Good?
Yeah.
Okay, so the whole Laura's article is literally titled, quote, "The world is burning, racialized regimes of eco-terror and the Anthropocene as Eurocene."
Yep.
How is this inconsistent with the AF's thesis?
We've read multiple pieces of link evidence to the one you see. I can go through them. The first piece of
That's
evidence
fine.
is
So it's just based on the links, right?
like that's how
Okay.
A-to-A works.
Yeah, sure. How is the 1 in C written for black folk?
The one in C?
Yeah.
What do you mean like written for black?
Well, your Curry evidence says that you have to write for black folk in order to not be Western and white folk.
I think what Curry says.
No,
like,
that's a
Curry-
quote from the card. So can you explain to me how you do not bite the quote?
What you mean Yancey?
Or no, wait, is that what it is? Whatever the white fill link is.
Yeah, the Yancey evidence talks about how our politics and our notions that sort of that structure
I'm just asking
have
why
to
you
be
don't bite the
consistent
link
with
to this
understanding that understands oppression towards black people. It has to be able to account for the ways in which different people experience violence in different forms.
Okay,
and
so
the
if the
ways in
app
which black
accounts for
people-
the ways in which different people experience different violence in different forms, then the app doesn't bite Western
in
forms.
sort of a comparative process to the sort of current global ordering. That means you have to analyze historical sort of events, things like
The
that.
app analyzes tons of
I
historical.
don't think that's true.
Okay, the Nazi kid, read me a line from the app that bites this argument.
The one is sort of theoretical critique of technology, the way that Heidegger
Why is it
forms
critique
conception
of
place.
technology specifically like anti-Semitic?
So our argument makes a claim that Heidegger's sort of historical conception of historization of like what it means to have technology or sort of worldly politics, initially positioned the Jew as someone the Jewish person who is someone outside
Right,
of
so
that.
can you read
which
a
meant
line
that
from the app that would be consistent with that logic?
it's not a sort of line. The affirmative is not going to go around and like read a line that says that Jewish people are not unworldly.
then how
it's
is
a
the app
fundamental
anti-Semitic?
assumption that your theory of power allows for when it is actually deployed in the real world. That is problematic.
It seems
You're
like that's
citing
just
a
a
racist Nazi.
misapplication of
Your
theory.
sort of source arguments are bad.
Okay, sure. Is the K conditional?
Which one?
The colonialism K?
No.
Wait, okay. So like, how can you defend that unconditionally and then defend the Nazi alternative?
I can say that refusal is good and we should refuse that you read a Nazi.
Okay, sure. The last people to occupy the U.S. was indigenous people who used Western guns to kill
I
other
know
indigenous
exactly
people.
racist.
So how does he what?
Finish your question?
What'd you say?
Finish your question.
Wait, can you say what you
I
said?
said I know you're about to say some racist shit.
Racist. Okay. So the last people to occupy
four
the
times this year, bro.
the last
That's
people-
fine.
the last people to occupy. I mean, making this ground about ego is like very, very immature. But the
I
last
didn't
people to
say that.
the last people to occupy
You
this
said
land
that.
was indigenous groups who used Western guns to kill other indigenous people. So who does the land go back to?
Obviously, there are conflicts between Native people, but I think you're misunderstanding
So
the
we
nature
give
of how
the
that
land
conflict
back
was
to people
propagated
who will
by
go
settlers in
kill
the first
other
place.
indigenous people.
Okay, the idea that you can compare violence in between Native people to the sort of genocide and the targeted elimination of them that settlers reflected onto them is something that's definitely a link to the K.
Right.
Obviously, those forms of violence are extremely
Yeah.
distinct, and if you make that argument like 1 ER, we can have that debate.
All right. 5 minutes
What?
starting now.
Point in case, bro. Case in point.
What is the app stance on Lacan saying the N-word in a convention? Or the next stance?
It's probably bad, but I think that it
Cool.
depends on the
Just say
circumstances
it.
in which you said it.
Right.
You have to win that it's embedded in the theory, the K would actively deploy the logic that makes
Okay,
sense.
so that seems to take out the Nazi stuff.
It does not, or if it's your theory, it's very different. Different social norms exist for same problems.
211 left. The order is going to be the AF, then the Nazi K, then the SetCol K. I'm going to send one card on the Nazi K, and that's it.
Can you repeat the order for me one more time?
Yeah, AF, the Nazi K, and then the SetCol K.
Okay.
Okay, the card for the Nazi K is the disclosure stuff's gonna be on case, by the way.
I'm good.
Order one more time.
Yeah, just AF, Nazi K, and then SetCol K. All the judges good? Okay, perfect. Heresy good?
Yeah.
Cool.
Harris conceded that existence precedes essence, pre-guess any essence required essence, essence justified ways and truths was infinitely rest of only humans creating their own essence, playing the falsity of essence at all takes out the entirety of the critique. It would mean the fact that indigenous people exist precedes any essence that you have, which means there's no ontology capable of kind of do the I from the resolution to be a reorientation towards God's life being in the world. The act is not just a reduction of present, but a total release meant for being in which we reconceptualize ourselves from a technological standard reserve human resource and natural resource world in which necessarily exists and derive meaning. The interrelational exchange includes the recognition of being with the capacity to create their own meaning, place center understanding of identity formulation and interconnection with nature and community, which solves psychological alienation and the object stripping of meaning and material impacts of climate change, capitalism, and the global conflict. All leave the line behind the disclosures of voting issue. Step 1, no violation. You just asserted it. Hold the line. Don't let the student read a violation because it would be new, and which also means touching it to her answers of violation. 2, no reason prep times matters. 3, no impact of voting issues in any speech. There's no fairness voter, which means you should not vote into argument. The reactionary politics argument 1, the opposite of reactionary politics, literally reject politics, was so clear out across. We did not defend the whole resolution. We specifically enacted the argument absent the state, which means there's no argument that's political. The one to see reinforcing the concept of place argument. No, the one to see is rejection of the usage of land and the concept of space, which is aligned with the one NC logic. They say no uniqueness claim to existential anxiety. There is all the managerial stuff I explained in the overview. They say you want your responses to applications. No, it was literally the top of the app existence precedes essence, and the app was so clear you should just ask better cross-sex questions. They say melancholy, which I think you're affirming the resolution. The app was literally affects and did not defend the state. I don't know how that wasn't clear to you. You should have just read extra T. They say white field obfuscates the world, what misplays in theory. 1 is you link to all these arguments are writing in the context of blackness, which means that it does link to the argument. 2 is the app solves war and row based on the app, which proves our conception is a good form of philosophy. 3, the argument is incoherent. The app critiques the form of Western philosophy that the card is critiquing. 4 is that your arguments about war is literally writing in the context of psychoanalysis, which is based on Lacan, who worst case said the N-word, which is also turned the Nazi K, the Nazi K. We get the RBI of anti-Semitism, moral imperative, and after rejects anti-Semitism, meaning that if the app is a good strategy to reject anti-Semitism, you should vote for us. 1 is we don't read premise for Heidegger, which means that there's no link between justified artists of interpreting the Heideggerian justifies Nazism. 2, make them pull the line to prove we're anti-Semitic. It's such a broad claim series that harms our voters. Hitler saying 2 + 2 = 4 doesn't deny the value of studying that war. Heidegger's work is incredibly influential from anthrocentricism to anti-blackness, space engaging in scholarship essential and beneficial for critical literature in general. 5, the app condemns anti-Semitism and frames the Jewish people's human being incapable of exercising their essential freedom. B, the Nazi desire to control the world and everyone is a conception of form, managerialism, we critique. C, I find meaning in the app by saying that I can be an existential agent, which means that I, as a Jewish person, have an ability to create meaning in the app. 4 is that they realized this work was actually criticism of Nazism. While in 19, Heidegger's notebook saying earlier that he realized the stars of force are ultimately and in the barbaric and totalizing Nazi regime, and here's a modern technology called for another man getting standard of critique of the Nazis. Heidegger all identifies Hitler's style and Mussolini by new way he starts bringing criminals to the age, which is identified in absolute pursuit of the power of the K. The app explains indigenous violence better. Individuals have the ability to create meaning because they're existential agents, which means that they have existential anxiety about others internally. The reason why colonization happened is Europeans were confronted with the unknown and afraid by externalizing their anxiety about objects as they managed and attempted to eliminate them in order to alleviate the anxiety. The reminiscence of colonization today is continuing that mindset of control domination. Illustrated the app argument about Western technology. The app embraces being in the world difference and we can't control everything. It means resolved instant colonization. That's illustrating the alt, which investigates the ways colonization takes place just by permission to the alt. The alt is a project. The ultimate attempts to create a meaningful exchange between indigenous people in the separate world. If this does anything to alleviate indigenous suffering, proves the alleviation is possible. And the alt engaging in the theory of the app method, which does nothing, makes you vote after a risk for good, pass house wager. Your theory of SetCol can only explain why dishes happen when we explain your arguments along with things like capitalism and more, which means the app always on scope. There's an exportability to set your alt only happens in the context of debate, which doesn't spill over to other institutions, only our mindset solved, which was the conceded one AC Feldman evidence on the thesis. There's pass house wager 1% versus that the indigenous people knowledge logic means air apping is a broad claim whether it would not be justified. Their thesis claims psychoanalysis not falsifiable, neo-empirical basis of life, not a universally prescribed, no war for psycho coming out of the 1C, hold the line. 2 requires them winning every single person the way feels this way. way. If you as a judge don't feel that way, you should feel uncomfortable voting for this argument. The last peoples to occupy the U.S. groups was in the U.S. The U.S. was indigenous group. The U.S. are going to kill other people, so the indigenous people will literally just return into other indigenous people, which means they're still indigenous. Like they say, indigenous people aren't recognized, even if that they have resolved that by saying we adopt a mindset that resolves the root cause. The F is not topical. The alternative, one cause analysis about it, gives white people a reason to do everything but resolve the incident. Their arguments, the Henderson evidence. If we win or a better analysis of settler colonialism, that means that we are turning this argument against itself. You like you lose is a terrible model. To be a question of who is the better analysis of settler colonialism. The affirmative is that.
420. What was the warrant for the RBI?
Yeah, your anti-Semitism card says we should reject anti-Semitism in every instance, and it's a moral imperative. That means that if I prove that our arguments are good to combat anti-Semitism, then that would mean that it's a reason you should prefer the affirmative inherently.
What was the answer to the decolonization on metaphor court?
Yeah, there were a couple of arguments. First is that we need it to spill out to other mindsets. There was an argument about how the app is better at explaining indigenous violence, which means that any question of explaining indigenous violence should outweigh per your own. It's the Yancey card. There were a couple of other arguments on other flows that could be applied to this argument as well.
Alright, that's time. Order is the colonialism K, Heidegger K, case. colonialism K. The colonialism K is going to start on their argument about native people killing each other. Then it's going to start on Heidegger. Or then we're going to go to Heidegger K, sorry, and then K's talking. I'll sign first.
I'm good.
Okay. Everyone good? Cross-sects and their argument in the one are propagandally the critique that should be a voting issue in this round. The strongest way that any sort of argument implicates itself to violent impacts is the argument in the one that says that, oh, but native people kill each other too, using Western technology. That is the biggest link to the critique because it demonstrates the ways in which they obfuscate the roles that settlers play in that violence and say that the indigenous people themselves are colonial, obscures the role that settlers had in that violence. Two arguments. One is that they misunderstand the nature of how settlers sold the native people those guns in the first place, oftentimes to advance their own interests. For example, sort of colonial skirmishes between the British colonies and French colonies sort of funded native groups by saying that we're going to colonize you if you don't fight this other native group in the first place. Implicates this argument in the first place. But two, the idea that you can compare forms of violence, the idea of sort of native skirmishes to the actual genocide that functions, that destroys all of native, the 90% of native cultures is sort of definitely functionally distinct, and you should not feel comfortable equivalating those because then it just boils down to this normal conflict, which is obviously much more nuanced than that is the biggest impact of the round because it links to active erasure as an active disavowal of the violence that occurs, which as for the Henderson evidence is going to be the biggest impact. Next, I'll go to Lemon proper. They say explanatory power. They can say, oh, natives are externalized, but they are unable to tell you how those structures actually exist. Why were natives particularly externalized? Why were they externalized in this particular way? That's the horrors evidence. The fundamental structural antagonism of the current global ordering is that all life is compared to the Western man. That causes forms of gratuitous violence towards black and native people in the context of things like events like the transformation of slavery to police patrol, to slavery patrols, to things like mass incarceration, or the gratuitous violence that occurs towards native peoples in the context of cultural erasure from the elimination of cultures and boarding schools towards forced sterilization of women. All of these events you can vote affirmative and say, oh, well, they're just being externalized, but you want to understand that there's a more nuanced form of way these violences occur, and the affirmative actively obfuscates that process, and you should cleanly vote negative. That also is the extension of the ontology war. The second argument at Western ontology spill-up is non-unique. We have better spill-up. Our argument is that our analytic of politics is better, which means that even if the sort of 1AC defends a model of theorization and saying that, oh, our theorization is good, that spills over to other rounds, we have defended that theorization must be tied towards a model of politics. That was a decolonization, is not a metaphor card. That is a link to the critique and a case turn because it demonstrates that the 1AC is unable to generate a form of politics that is capable of responding to the structures that we just listed out in the ontology extension. They can say and address and diagnose all the ways in which violence occurs, but they are incapable of responding to it, which means they trap themselves in a form of melancholy in which they sort of find complacency and pleasure in this theorization, which makes them complicit because they will never actually act. That only argument was, oh, we spill up too. Guess what? You can spill up in a way that is consistent with this argument. The next argument proper, they say the alternative engaging in a theory outweighs the sort of Pascal's meter makes no sense. We are not saying that passive progress is never actually possible. We're saying that it is not possible in the confines of white institutions like the state. That means that progress outside of it is possible in the context of the alternative conceded examples of alternative solvency in the context of the king evidence. Native people blockading ships carrying aid to Israel from Tacoma, Washington is definitely a sort of example that is capable of solving a risk like the affirmative in a much more sort of realistic way that sort of which answers the Pascal's wager. The sort of alternative makes no sense because the link differential against the way the Pascal's trying against is the affirming a sort of racist 1AC. The next argument is psycho non-falsifiable. We're making a structural claim about gratuitous violence and internalized logics. They conceded that they have no other explanatory power, which means that even if psychoanalysis is non-falsifiable, we're not going for that argument. We're going for a structural claim about how the state internally operates because the state is never going to decolonize itself. Next, they say that sort of this app is not topical. The Henderson evidence. This makes no sense. The Henderson evidence is super clear. All it's in the framework argument here. Our model and way you should evaluate this bit is the one to see scholarship ethical in the ways that it is produced. We have framed that question through the critique and through our analytic of the Eurocene. The links to the affirmative demonstrate that they form a bad model of politics. Henderson demonstrates that the only portal impact of this round is disrupting settler subjectivities that are sort of created in which we reify settler colonial logics and assumptions by unconsciously relaying them and creating smooth faces. That is the only portal impact on this round. They made no fairness argument saying you link, you lose isn't a response to this because we proved that you actively are racist and that is bad. The one is the sort of K proper. One, they didn't sort of win that we were anti-Semitic. They said that they were not anti-Semitic, which is incoherent. But two, the app being explicitly anti-black and anti-indigenous should outweigh because this is an action rather than an omission. The third argument, the colorblindness link on the case page demonstrates that they are also incapable of responding to anti-Semitic structures in the same way, which means that they cannot solve. The K arguments are very related to the Heidegger K. Do not separate them. The K space proper. 1. Their explanatory power just means relationships can change. We agree. We have to disrupt the current structures that propagate forms of violence. That was the extension of the Yancey argument, the sort of combination of the Yancey argument and colonization on a metaphor argument that we made on the K page. They were a very clear argument. Their only sort of argument here is that the act was effective. They have not indicated what that actually means. They have not done the work of explaining what the imagination of the 1AC means in the context of on-the-ground activism and real politics, that it's capable of responding to these institutional structures. They say that, well, we defended the resolution would be good, but how do we actually get there? The next sort of argument is that they say we link to Yancey. Yancey is not just saying that we can only exclusively talk about blackness, but rather that our theorizations have to include an analytic that is capable of explaining the violence of anti-blackness, which we are definitely capable of doing. And if we win the link to the app, then you are unable. But either way, Yancey does not think that we shouldn't also theorize things like anti-native violence or sort of anti-Semitism, which definitely to answer this argument, the Leconte and the N-word. 1, we conceded that we can repurpose literature for decolonialism, which takes us out. 2, the sort of either way. Okay, the round super clear. The one area was way too defensive. The links are just an interesting permutation. They've conceded a bunch of different ways in which their politics is unsustainable in the context of resolving their impacts. The explanatory power in the 2AR is super going to be unclear and new. They're going to say, oh, but Native people are seen as something that is like generic, whatever. But the question is not just can Native people be seen as a victim to the structure, but how can we repurpose our analytical resistance to respond to that violence in newer ways? Only the negative is capable of doing that. As for the alternative of refusal, the app was racist, vote negative.
Cool. I have 2 minutes right now. Okay. The F, then the K.
Okay, I'm good.
Everyone else good? Okay. Wait, let me make sure all the judges are actually good. Everyone good? Okay, perfect.
The 2 and R conceded that existence precedes essence because any essence required that essence justify white intrinsic is infinitely regressive. Only humans creating their own essence and explaining the possibility of essence at all. You conceded this takes out the entirety of the K because it would mean that our existence in the world precedes any form of essence that would come from ontology, which means it's not intrinsic to indigenous people that they will be hated, which means that their existence in the world resolves all the ontology claims. That is the way that we repurpose ourselves in an analytic towards an understanding of Dawes to an extent that the app explains indigenous files better. Individuals have the ability to create meaning because they are existential agents, which means that they have existential anxiety about other nations intrinsically. The reason why colonization happened was because Europeans were confronted with the unknown and framed it by externalizing their anxiety about an object onto that and then managed and attempted to eliminate it in order to alleviate anxiety. The remnants of colonization today is a continuation of that mindset and colonial and control and domination, which illustrates that the app's argument about war technology, the app embraces being in the world difference in that we can control everything, which means it resolves the instance of colonization, which you've conceded permutation to the alternative, because the project of the alternative attempts to create a meaningful exchange between indigenous and the settler world. If that does anything to alleviate indigenous suffering and proves the alleviation is possible and that the alt is engaging in the app method, if it does nothing, vote after a risk that we're good, because our theory can explain things outside of scope, which takes out your answers. You conceded a permutation in a KDK debate, which means there should be no risk of any negative ballot. There is not a single word of the negative that said permutation, which means you should not let them apply any of their arguments. They've conceded the extension of the 1AC Feldman evidence, which is that our desire for colonialism is driven by our alienation from our relationship to the world, treatment of land and other human resources exploited as a result of a lack of our own subjectivity, which is extremely tied to our relationship with the world. Not all indigenous people are the same. Many indigenous scholars have ethically passed down knowledge which endorse the app method that's better than the alternative, which is focused on their movement that relies on exploitation of the natural world for human improvement. Their method is an explicit militarist action. All of their examples are bad, and you can see that we control the root cause for why imperialism exists. The debate should be super simple. Now I'm just going to do some line-by-line stuff to clean up the work. The psychoanalysis non-falsifiable argument is the first argument I'm going for. They have not justified why there is a lack and why indigenous people inherently, or why there's an inherent desire to eliminate indigenous people. Their only answer is that there's a structural claim embedded in gratuitous violence. But ask yourself, read the Juarez evidence. He is a psychoanalyst, and he actually works inside of debate. And it's a structural claim that is reliant on psychoanalysis. I dare you to read this card and tell me where it doesn't justify, or where it doesn't talk about a conception of lack. You've conceded that if you as a judge don't feel this way about indigenous people, then you should not believe their ontology claim, which means that if you as a judge don't think that you are racist, then you should be signing about negative voting issue. Want its analysis of what happens post-alternative and the consequence of it. It's not obfuscating violence. It's saying, maybe we should theorize a better way to resolve SetCol than just let natives run free, which is a conception of being through docile. They say we concede alt sovereignty. No, you concede a dissent to the alternative, which that content analysis is bad because it gives white people reason not to do anything which resolve instance anti-blackness. They've conceded the argument on the Henderson evidence that if we win that the app is a better analysis of indigenous violence, then you should be voting affirmative. They've conceded every extrapolation of indigenous violence, and they've conceded a permutation, which means there should be literally no neg ballot. Look, the permutation was conceded. They don't make any reasons why the permutation is false in the 2NR. Vote neg.
Okay.